All right. Well, let's get started. Good to see everybody on a very rainy Tuesday. Hopefully, everybody is staying as dry as possible today. Um, First of all, thank you for your flexibility and patience with last week. I always hate canceling classes at the last minute, but well, without going into too much details, our school has been unfortunate this year. We've actually lost two students already since the beginning of the year to two totally different things. Neither one related to COVID or anything like that, but it's just made for an interesting year so far. And if any of you have worked at schools that have gone through that, a lot of things shift around very quickly in the days after things like that. So I just last week had to deal with some other stuff. So appreciate your patience and hopefully, again, being somebody who actually teaches online instruction, I did not feel great about last week just because it was sort of last minute me trying to transfer what I would have done in class into something online. Hopefully it made sense. Hopefully uh, it was able to be followed along with and so on. Um, and we move forward this week. So this week the main topic is assessment. Because I had put in that delay week a couple of weeks ago, our whole syllabus has sort of been off by a week for the last several weeks. What I'm going to do to kind of get us back into sync with the original syllabus is um, this week and next week we're supposed to be about assessment. I'm going to sort of split that up a little bit. We'll do this week focused on assessment for instruction and the assessment of instruction piece, which has to do more with uh, evaluating your instructional programs, not evaluating your students' learning. I'm going to combine that in with something a little bit down the road. So that'll sort of get us back into sync with the original plan in terms of the weeks. And I'll just fold in what we're going to work on next week into a later class. So that should get things back on track there. So this week is about assessment. But as always, I want to leave a little open space here at the beginning. If there are any questions, I've been getting a lot of questions via email about things related to phase two. And hopefully I've been able to get back to everybody and answer those questions satisfactorily. But if there's anything related to phase two or to last week's topic or anything like that that you want to bring up now, now would be the time to do that. And if not, we'll kind of move ahead from there. But are there any questions for the good of the order related to either phase two or the last couple of weeks of classwork or anything along those lines? All right.
I might have questions about phase two, but maybe not until after I hand it in. I mean, I know that's
Oh,
not the right way to do it, but I think I did it right. I think I'm doing a good job, but it
okay.
doesn't exactly look like yours or sound as good as yours. But I mean,
Well,
I tried my hardest. It's pretty much completed. I just tomorrow I feel like I want to put some more stuff from the readings in it and try to make it sound a little more academic. But other than that, I mean, I did all my line items. I did all my materials. I did all my steps, and I'm just like the professor.
yeah, no, and that's, I keep coming back to this as maybe a core theme of this class, but not that I don't want to provide examples and exemplars and things like that, but I also want to be careful because from the beginning I've said that this course is not about, teaching a template. And if you use this template and just plug the things in, it's really more about understanding sort of why each of the pieces are there. And if in your particular instance, you see a better way to organize the material or to present the material, then with any of these, feel free to follow that. What I say is, as long as the information is there, if you want to organize it differently or From a couple weeks ago, I was sort of giving the options of you could do this as a list format or you could do it more as a paragraph format. I mean, anything along those lines. It should, first and foremost, it should make sense to you and look logical to you. So, I know that part of the challenge through these planning phases, I think, has just been the fact that we've had a couple of layers of steps, and I think some people have just gotten confused when we're using the word step about sort of which steps we're talking about. So maybe just as an outline again, we have, we always start with the instructional goal. That's what's driving everything. And then for this phase two, in terms of planning, we really had two layers of steps. There's the top level layer, which was about segmenting the material. It was about that was the IPA work. That was about looking at the amount of brain work that is needed to get to the goal and trying to divide that up into processing levels that a student can manage. So that's what I've been trying to refer to that in all my write-ups and everything as the IPA steps. So those are more, the students do this, and then they do this, and then they do this, and then that leads them to the reaching of the goal. Then within each of those steps, and those are the steps that in phase two I sort of suggested get the headers. Within each of those steps, that was the work from a few weeks ago, which was the types of learning and what I've been trying to call consistently the process steps. And what that is looking at each of those segments, each of the chunks, figuring out what kind of learning is going on in that chunk. And that then leads to one of those processes that we had in the glossary activity and so on, that and in the wiki notes about, like, if you're teaching a procedure, here's sort of a framework of steps that you can do to teach a procedure, and here's some if you're teaching problem solving and so on. So that's that second tier of steps. So the one is about breaking up the cognitive load on the student into chunks, and then the other level is about taking each of those chunks and figuring out the process steps that leads the student to getting that chunk. So, and then materials, it depends on sort of how the materials work in your instance, but materials, if the materials are specific to process steps, which the example I put in um, did follow that. So what I did was put in the materials which each of those process steps. But you may find, and particularly if you're working on a goal with younger students, where there's not as much, there aren't as many levels of detail to what you're doing, maybe if the materials make more sense to group together and put those with the IPA step, that's also possible too. It really just kind of depends on what level the materials attach to. So, so hopefully that's clear enough. And I've been trying to be clear, like I said, in referring to IPA steps and to the process steps or the types of learning steps, to try to differentiate between those two things. I wish I could come up with a different word than steps, but they are both steps in terms of what they are. So hopefully that's been clear enough. But again, I structured the example very much in almost an outline way, with the indenting each thing and sort of putting them as subheadings underneath. But if you think that you're better at explaining the information or laying your information out in a more narrative way, that's fine, as long as each of those elements is covered, as long as we see how the overall goal was broken up, and then how each of those broken up steps was addressed in terms of what type of learning is going on, then it should be fine. Um, so hopefully that makes sense. um, so um, yeah, so I guess anything else along those lines before we move into new material. Checking my own notes here because there were a couple of things, but Yeah, so that's basically it. And again, these phases, while I do throw a grade on them for the purposes of being able to return the information back to you and the feedback back to you, the really the grade that counts is going to be the one with sort of the final project. So with each of these phases, you will get them back. You'll get them back with the comments from me. And if there's things that you want to adjust moving forward or revise or change or reorganize, you'll have that opportunity as we pull the material from each of these phases into the final document at the end of the course. Um, so that's hopefully also helpful. So, all right. So assessment, everybody's favorite topic, right? Assessment. I saw a couple of half-hearted thumbs and oh yeah, it is. Yeah, assessment is it's one of those things. I think it's certainly got kind of a bad rap over the last 10 or 20 years or so, with all of the focus on high stakes, standardized, standards based assessments, and so on, and all of that. So I think, unfortunately, assessment has kind of gotten a bad name for itself. What's important to remember, though, is that good instruction really can't happen without assessment. And number two, I think we need to get away from the mindset that assessment equals tests. And I go over this a lot with the people that I work with in my school district. I do a lot with our curriculum software where we keep all of our district's curriculum. And there's a whole section for assessments. And when we get to that section with staff members and faculty members, their eyes start to glaze over, they start to shake, and they immediately go to just thinking about like the unit tests and the final exams and the midterm exams. And I think what's important to remember about assessment is that really any time that you get information from students about their level of understanding, that is an assessment. So it's far bigger than just thinking about the tests. So most assignments that you give are assessments. If a student turns stuff work back into you and you get information from that about how they're doing, that is an assessment, even if we don't call it that. But in terms of instructional design, I think that's one of the key things to keep in mind, is that assessment is ongoing. It occurs all over the place. It's more than just testing students. It's any time that you are looking to get a handhold on where students are and how they're doing. Um, so what we're going to be looking at, our focus in this course is not necessarily to actually build assessments. We're not going to necessarily be actually figuring out the questions and the formatting and all of that. Because our focus in here is on instructional design, I want to think more about sort of how assessment integrates into an instructional design, where it can integrate, what information it gives you along the way. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the ideas of formative and summative assessment. Formative, I think, almost is the more important one, and I think a lot of times it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So a lot of, from an instructional design standpoint, honestly, the formative assessment piece is kind of more important when it comes to designing instruction. So that's going to kind of be part of our focus tonight. We're going to talk maybe a little bit about structuring actual individual question or some strategies, but that's going to be more geared to, I do want to finish up tonight with talking a little bit about the issues of doing online assessment. Not that your instructional design plans maybe are being designed to be taught online, but especially again with the experiences of the last couple of years, where we've been forced in many cases to try to get information from about how students are learning, but do it in an online environment. There are obviously a couple of challenges specific to online assessing that I do want to talk about. So we're going to talk a little bit there about more like, here's an individual question. How would we frame this in an online environment? But for the most part, I want us to think more about just sort of the structure of assessment, where assessment would plug into an instructional design, and kind of what role it plays along the way. So that's where I want to keep our main focus for tonight. So what I'd like to do first, just to kind of set the stage, is I've posted 2 articles to this week's Moodle. The second one says optional reading. It's like 14 or 16 pages long. I'll talk more about what it is, but it's more of a clearinghouse of a bunch of information about research into formative assessment. So that's not a required read, but just to kind of set the stage for tonight, I do want us to read through the other reading, which is actually taken from a Schoology page. I don't know. Does anybody here use Schoology in their schools? Or okay, we have at least one and a half maybe. If you don't know, Schoology is like another Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams or Moodle or Blackboard. It's another learning management system that a number of schools use. So that's not really relevant to the article, but it is. I found it was a nice sort of short read that addressed some of the key ideas that I'd like us to consider tonight, to sort of think about tonight. So before we go further, I want to give us a few minutes just to read through that. So obviously you don't need to stay on camera for this. You can just go to the Moodle and click on it. I think it's reading number 6. I think is the number. I can click over to it here. Yes, reading 6. It says Schoology assessment article. And again, it's not, as you can well imagine, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of articles out there about assessment and instruction. This is not meant to be an end all be all, but more of just like an introduction and a getting us thinking about a couple of things that we can discuss and talk about. So it's more just to kind of break the ice on this and set the stage for our discussions tonight. So it is 7:40. I don't know that it'll even take us maybe even 10 minutes to read through this. So actually, why don't I do this just so that everybody gets whatever time they need. You can go ahead and stop your video, turn your cameras off. When you are done reading, just come back in and just turn your camera back on. And then once I see that everybody's back here, then I'll know we're ready to move on, and we can start the discussion. So whatever it takes, it takes. I know people read at different rates and whatever. It doesn't really matter. So just take a few minutes and read through that article, and then once we're all back here, we will move on with our discussion.
The peer pressure is real right now. The peer pressure is
Yeah. It's not a race. It's not a race. Nobody gets a cookie if they're the first person back in the room. So take the time you need. All right. I'll see you in a few.